Lord Brahma said, after thus congratulating the sages for their nice words, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, whose abode is in the kingdom of God, spoke as follows. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, these attendants of mine, Jaya and Vijaya by name, have committed a great offense against you because of ignoring me. Purport: to commit an offense at the feet of a devotee of the Lord is a great wrong. Even when a living entity is promoted to Vaikuṇṭha, there's still the chance that he may commit offenses. But the difference is that when one is in a Vaikuṇṭha planet, even if by chance one commits an offense, he is protected by the Lord. This is the remarkable fact in the dealings of the Lord and the servitor. As seen in the present incident concerning Jaya and Vijaya, the word atikramam used herein indicates that in offending a devotee, one neglects the Supreme Lord himself. By mistake, the doorman held the sages from entering Vaikuṇṭha, but because they were engaged in the transcendental service of the Lord, their annihilation was not expected by advanced devotees. The Lord's presence on the spot was very pleasing to the hearts of the devotees. The Lord understood that the trouble was due to his lotus feet not being seen by the sages, and therefore he wanted to please them by personally going there. The Lord is so merciful that even if there is some impediment for the devotee, he himself manages matters in such a way that the devotee is not bereft of having audience at his lotus feet. There is a very good example in the life of Haridas Thakur. When Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was residing at Jagannath Puri, Haridas Thakur, who happened to be Mohammedan by birth, was with him. In Hindu temples, especially in those days, no one but a Hindu was allowed to enter. Although Haridas Thakur was the greatest of all Hindus in his behavior, he considered himself a Mohammedan and did not enter the temple. Lord Chaitanya could understand his humility, and since he did not go to see the temple, Lord Chaitanya himself, who is none different from Jagannath, used to come and sit with Haridas Thakur daily. Here in Srimad Bhagavatam, we also find the same behavior of the Lord. His devotees were prevented from seeing his lotus feet, but the Lord himself came to see them on the same lotus feet for which they aspired. It is also significant that he was accompanied by the goddess of fortune. The goddess of fortune is not to be seen by ordinary persons, but the Lord was so kind that although the devotees did not aspire for such an honor, he appeared before them with the goddess of fortune. 3. O great sages, I approve of the punishment that you who are devoted to me have meted out to them. To me, the brāhmaṇa is the highest and most beloved personality. The disrespect shown by my attendants has actually been displayed by me because the doormen are my servitors. I take this to be an offense by myself. Therefore, I seek your forgiveness for the incident that has arisen. The Lord is always in favor of the brahmanas and the cows, and therefore it is said, Go brāhmaṇa hitaya cha. Lord Krishna or Vishnu, the Supreme Personality of God, is always the worshipable deity of the brahmanas. In the Vedic literature, in the Rig mantra hymns of the Rig Veda, it is stated that those who are actually brahmanas always look to the lotus feet of Vishnu. Om Tad Vishnu Paramam Padam Sada Pashanti Surayaha. Those who are qualified brahmanas worship only the Vishnu form of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, which means Krishna, Rama, and all Vishnu expansions. A so-called brahmana who is born in the family of brahmanas but performs activities aimed against the Vaishnavas cannot be accepted as a brahmana, because brahmana means Vaishnava, and Vaishnava means brahmana. One who has become a devotee of the Lord is also a brahmana. The formula is Brahma Janatiti Brahmana. A brahmana is one who has understood Brahman, and a Vaishnava is one who has understood the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Brahman realization is the beginning of realization of the personality of Godhead. One who understands the personality of Godhead also knows the impersonal feature of the Supreme, which is Brahman. Therefore, one who becomes a Vaiṣṇava is already a brāhmaṇa. It should be noted that the glories of the brāhmaṇa described in this chapter by the Lord himself refer to as devotee brāhmaṇa, or the Vaishnava. It should never be misunderstood that the so-called brahmanas who are born in brahmana families but have no brahminical qualifications are referred to in this connection. A wrong act committed by a servant leads people in general to blame his master, just as a spot of white leprosy on any part of the body pollutes all of the skin. A Vaishnava therefore should be fully qualified. As stated in the Bhagavatam, anyone who has become a Vaishnava has developed all the good qualities of the demigods. There are 26 qualifications mentioned in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. A devotee should always see that his Vaishnava qualities increase with the advancement of his Krishna consciousness. A devotee should be blameless because any offense by the devotee is a scar on the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The devotee's duty is to be always conscious in his dealings with others, especially with another devotee of the Lord. Anyone in the entire world, even down to the Chandala, who lives by cooking and eating the flesh of the dog, is immediately purified if he takes bath in hearing through the ear the glorification of my name, fame, etc. Now you have realized me without doubt. Therefore, I will not hesitate to lop off my own arm if its conduct is found hostile to you. Real purification can take place in human society if its members take to Krishna consciousness. This is clearly stated in all Vedic literature. Anyone who takes to Krishna consciousness in all sincerity, even if he is not very advanced in good behavior, is purified. A devotee can be recruited from any section of human society, although it is not expected that everyone in all segments of society is well behaved. As stated in this verse, and in many places in Bhagavad Gita, even if one is not born in a Brahmin family, or even if he is born in a family of Chandalas, if he simply takes to Krishna consciousness, he is immediately purified. In Bhagavad Gita, 9th chapter, verse 30 through 32, it is clearly stated that even though a man is not well behaved, if he simply takes to Krishna consciousness, he is understood to be a saintly person. As long as a person is in this material world, he has two different relationships in his dealings with others. One relationship pertains to the body, and the other pertains to the spirit. As far as bodily affairs or social activities are concerned, although a person is purified on the spiritual platform, it is sometimes seen that he acts in terms of his bodily relationships. If a devotee born in a family of a Chandala, the lowest caste, is sometimes found engaged in his habitual activities, he is not to be considered a Chandala. In other words, a Vaishnava should not be evaluated in terms of his body. The Shastra states that no one should think the deity in the temple to be made of wood or stone, and no one should think that a person coming from a lower caste family who has taken to Krishna consciousness is still of the same low caste. These attitudes are forbidden because anyone who takes to Krishna consciousness is understood to be fully purified. He is at least engaged in the process of purification. And if he sticks to the principle of Krishna consciousness, he will very soon be fully purified. The conclusion is that if one takes to Krishna consciousness with all seriousness, he is to be understood as already purified, and Krishna is ready to give him protection by all means. The Lord assures herein that he is ready to give protection to his devotee, even if there is need to lop off part of his own body. The Lord continued, because I am the servitor of my devotees, My lotus feet have become so sacred that they immediately wipe out all sin. And I have acquired such a disposition that the goddess of fortune does not leave me, even though I have no attachment for her, and others praise her beauty and observe sacred vows to secure from her even a slight favor. The relationship between the Lord and his devotee is transcendently beautiful. And the devotee thinks that it is due, and the devotee, as the devotee thinks that it is due to being a devotee of the Lord that he is elevated in all good qualities, so the Lord also thinks that it is because of his devotion to the servitor that all his transcendental glories have increased. In other words, as the devotee is always anxious to render service to the Lord, so the Lord is ever anxious to render service to the devotee. The Lord admits herein that although he certainly has the quality that anyone who receives a slight particle of the dust of his lotus feet becomes at once a great personality, this greatness is due to his affection for his devotee. It is because of this affection that the goddess of fortune does not leave him, and that not only one, but many thousands of goddesses of fortune engage in his service. In the material world, simply to get a little favor from the goddess of fortune, people observe many rigid regulations of austerity and penance. The Lord cannot tolerate any inconvenience on the part of the devotee. He is therefore famous as Bhaktavatsal. I do not enjoy the oblations offered by my sacrificers in the sacrificial fire, which is one of my own mouths, with the same relish as I do the delicacies overflowing with ghee, which are offered to the mouths of the brāhmanas who have dedicated to me the results of their activities and who are ever satisfied with my prasad. The devotees of the Lord, or the Vaiṣṇava, does not take anything without offering it to the Lord. Since a Vaishnava dedicates all the results of his activities to the Lord, he does not taste anything eatable which is not first offered to him. The Lord also relishes giving to the Vaishnava's mouth all eatables offered to him. It is clear from this verse that the Lord eats through the sacrificial fire and the Brahmana's mouth. So many articles, grains, ghee, etc. are offered in sacrifice for the satisfaction of the Lord. The Lord accepts sacrificial offerings from the Brahmanas and devotees. And elsewhere it is stated that whatever is given for the Brahmanas and Vaishnavas to eat is also accepted by the Lord. But here it is said that he accepts offerings to the mouths of Brahmanas and Vaishnavas with even greater relish. The best example of this is found in the life of Advaita Prabhu in his dealings with Haridas Thakur. Even though Haridas was born of a Mohammedan family, Advaita Prabhu offered him the first dish of prasad after the performance of a sacred fire ceremony. Haridas Thakur informed him that he was born of a Mohammedan family, and asked why Advaita Prabhu was offering the first dish to a Mohammedan instead of to an elevated Brahmana. Out of his humbleness, Haridas condemned himself a Mohammedan, but Advaita Prabhu, being an experienced devotee, accepted him as a real Brahmana. Advaita Prabhu asserted that by offering the first dish to Haridas Thakur, he was getting the result of feeding 100,000 Brahmanas. The conclusion is that if one can feed a Brahmana or Vaishnava, it is better than performing hundreds of thousands of sacrifices. In this age, therefore, it is recommended that harer nāma, chanting the holy name of God, and pleasing the Vaiṣṇava are the only means to elevate oneself to spiritual life. Shall I read that one again? Yes. For those who would like a concise version of how to advance in devotional service. In this age, therefore, it is recommended that harer nāma, chanting the holy name of God, got that part right? Check. And pleasing the Vaishnava are the only means to elevate oneself to spiritual life. 2, that's it. I am the master of my unobstructed internal energy, and the water of the Ganges, the remnant left after my feet are washed. That water sanctifies the three worlds, along with Lord Shiva, who bears it on his head. If I can take the dust of the feet of the Vaiṣṇava on my head, who will refuse to do the same? The difference between the internal and external energies of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is that in the internal energy, or in the spiritual world, all the opulences are undisturbed. Whereas in the external or material energy, all the opulences are temporary manifestations. The Lord's supremacy is equal in both the spiritual and material worlds, but the spiritual world is called the kingdom of God, and the material world is called the kingdom of Maya. Maya refers to that which is not actually fact. The opulence of the material world is a reflection. It is stated in Bhagavad Gita that this material world is just like a tree whose roots are up and branches down. This means that the material world is the shadow of the spiritual world. Real opulence is in the spiritual world. In the spiritual world, the predominating deity is the Lord himself, whereas in the material world, there are many lords. That is the difference between the internal and external energies. The Lord says that although he is the predominating factor of the internal energy, and although the material world is sanctified just by the water that has washed his feet, he has the greatest respect for the brāhmaṇa and the Vaisṇava. When the Lord himself offers so much respect to the Vaisṇava and the brāhmaṇa, how can one deny such respect to such personalities? The brahmanas, the cows, and the defenseless creatures are my own body. Those whose faculty of judgment has been impaired by their own sin look upon these as distinct from me. They are just like furious serpents, and they are angrily torn apart by the bills of the vulture-like messengers of Yamaraj, the superintendent of sinful persons. The defenseless creatures, according to the Brahma Samhita, are the cows, brahmanas, women, children, and old men. Of these five, the brahmanas and cows are especially mentioned in this verse because the Lord is always anxious about the benefit of the brahmanas and the cows and is prayed to in this way. The Lord especially instructs, therefore, that no one should be envious of these five, especially the cows and brahmanas. In some of the Bhagavatam readings, the word duhitre is used instead of duhati, but in either case, the meaning is the same. Duhati means cow, and duhitre can also be used to mean cow, because the cow is supposed to be the daughter of the sun god. Just as children are taken care of by the parents, women as a class should be taken care of by the father, husband, or grown-up son. Those who are helpless must be taken care of by their respective guardians. Otherwise, the guardians will be subjected to the punishment of Yamaraj, who is appointed by the Lord to supervise the activities of sinful living creatures. The assistants or messengers of Yamaraj are likened here to vultures, and those who do not execute their respective duties in protecting their wards are compared to serpents. Vultures deal very seriously with serpents, and similarly the messengers will deal very seriously with neglectful guardians. On the other hand, they captivate my heart, who are gladdened in heart, and who, their lotus faces enlightened by nectarian smiles, respect the brahmanas, even though the brahmanas utter harsh words. They look upon the brahmanas as my own self and pacify them by praising them in loving words, even as a son would appease an angry father, or as I am pacifying you. Purport. It has been observed in many instances in the Vedic scriptures that when the brahmanas or Vaishnavas curse someone in an angry mood, the person who is cursed does not take it upon himself to treat the brahmanas and Vaishnavas in the same way. There are many examples of this. For instance, the sons of Kuvera, when cursed, by the great sage Narada, did not seek revenge in the same harsh way, but submitted. Here also, when Jaya and Vijaya were cursed by the 4 Kumaras, they did not become harsh towards them. Rather, they submitted. That should be the way of treating Brahmins and Vaishnavas. One may sometimes be faced with a grievous situation created by a Brahmana, but instead of meeting him with a similar mood, one should try to pacify him with a smiling face and mild treatment. Brahmanas and Vaishnavas should be accepted as earthly representatives of Narayan. Nowadays, some foolish persons have manufactured the term Daridra Narayan, indicating that the poor man should be accepted as the representative of Narayan. But in Vedic culture, we do not find that poor men should be treated as representatives of Narayan. Of course, those who are unprotected, as mentioned here, Of course, those who are unprotected are mentioned here, But the definition of this phrase is clear from the Shastras. The poor man should not be unprotected, but the Brahmana should especially be treated as the representative of Narayan and should be worshipped like him. It is specifically said that to pacify the Brahmanas, one's face should be lotus-like. A lotus-like face is exhibited when one is adorned with love and affection. In this respect, the example of the fathers being angry at the son and the son's trying to pacify the father with smiling and sweet words is very appropriate. These servants of mine have transgressed against you, not knowing the mind of their master. I shall therefore deem it a favor done to me if you order that, although reaping the fruit of their transgression, they may return to my presence soon, and the time of their exile from my abode may expire before long. From this statement, we can understand how anxious the Lord is to get his servitor back into Vaikuṇṭha. This incident therefore proves that those who have once entered a Vaikuṇṭha planet can never fall down. The case of Jaya and Vijaya is not a fall down, it is just an accident. The Lord is always anxious to get such devotees back again to the Vaikuṇṭha planets as soon as possible. It is to be assumed that there is no possibility of a misunderstanding between the Lord and the devotees. But when there are discrepancies or disruptions between one devotee and another, one has to suffer the consequences, although that suffering is temporary. The Lord is so kind to his devotees that he took all the responsibility for the doorman's offense and requested the sages to give them facilities to return to Vaikuṇṭha Loka as soon as possible. Brahma continued, even though the sages had been bitten by the serpent of anger, their souls were not satiated with hearing the Lord's lovely and illuminating speech, which was like a series of Vedic hymns. The Lord's excellent speech was difficult to comprehend because of its momentous import and its most profound significance. The sages heard it with wide open ears and pondered it as well, but although hearing, they could not understand what he intended to do. It should be understood that no one can surpass the Supreme Personality of Godhead in speaking. There is no difference between the Supreme Person and his speeches, for he stands on the absolute platform. The sages tried with wide open ears to understand the words from the lips of the Supreme Lord, but although his speech was very concise and meaningful, the sages could not completely comprehend what he was saying. They could not even comprehend the purport of the speech or what the Supreme Lord wanted to do, nor could they understand whether the Lord was angry or pleased with them. The 4 Brahmana sages were nevertheless extremely delighted to behold him, and they experienced a thrill throughout their bodies. They then spoke as follows to the Lord, who had revealed the multi-glories of the Supreme Personality through his internal potency, Yogamaya. The sages were almost too puzzled to speak before the Supreme Personality of Godhead for the first time, and the hairs of their bodies stood erect due to their extreme joy. The highest opulence in the material world is called Parameshya, the opulence of Brahma. But that material opulence of Brahma, who lives on the topmost planet within this material world, cannot compare to the opulence of the Supreme Lord, because the transcendental opulence in the spiritual world is caused by Yogamaya, whereas the opulence in the material world is caused by Mahamaya. The sages said, O Supreme Personality of Godhead, we are unable to know what you intend for us to do, for even though you are the supreme ruler of all, you speak in our favor as if we had done something good for you. The sages could understand that the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is above everyone, was speaking as if he were in the wrong. Therefore, it was difficult for them to understand the words of the Lord. They could understand, however, that the Lord was speaking in a humble way. They could understand, however, that the Lord was speaking in such a humble way just to show them his all-merciful favor. O Lord, you are the supreme director of the Brahminical culture. You're considering the Brahmanas to be in the highest position is your example for teaching others. Actually, you are the supreme worshipable deity, not only for the gods, but for the Brahmanas also. In the Brahma Samhita, it is clearly stated that the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the cause of all causes. There are undoubtedly many demigods, the chiefs of whom are Brahma and Shiva. Lord Vishnu is the Lord of Brahma and Shiva, not to speak of the Brahmanas in the material world. As mentioned in Bhagavad Gita, the Supreme Lord is very favorable toward all activities performed according to Brahminical culture, or the qualities of control of the senses and mind, cleanliness, forbearance, faith in Scripture, and practical and theoretical knowledge. The Lord is the super soul of everyone. In Bhagavad Gita, it is said that the Lord is the source of all emanations. Thus, he is also the source of Brahma and Shiva. You are the source of the eternal occupation of all living entities, and by your multi-manifestations of personalities of Godhead, you have always protected religion. You are the supreme objective of religious principles, and in our opinion, you are inexhaustible and unchangeable eternally. The statement in this verse, Dharmasya Paramoguhya, refers to the most confidential part of all religious script principles. This is confirmed in Bhagavad Gita. The conclusion of Lord Krishna in his advice to Arjuna is, give up all other religious engagement and just surrender unto me. This is the most confidential knowledge in executing religious principles. In the Bhagavatam also it is stated that if one does not become Krishna conscious after very rigidly executing one's specified religious duties, all his labor in following so-called religious principles is simply a waste of time. Here also the sages confirm the statement that the Supreme Lord, not the demigods, is the ultimate goal of all religious principles. There are many foolish propagandists who say that worship of the demigods is also a way to reach the supreme goal. But in the authorized statements of Srimad Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita, this is not accepted. Bhagavad Gita says that one who worships a particular demigod can reach the demigod's planet, but one who worships the Supreme Personality of Godhead can enter into Vaikuṇṭha. Some propagandists say that regardless of what one does, he will ultimately reach the supreme abode of the Personality of Godhead, but this is not valid. The Lord is eternal, the Lord's servitor is eternal, and the Lord's abode is eternal. They are all described here as sanatan, or eternal. The result of devotional service, therefore, is not temporary, as is the achievement of heavenly planets by worshipping the demigods. The sages wanted to stress that although the Lord, out of his causeless mercy, says that he worships the brāhmanas and Vaishnavas, actually the Lord is worshipable not only by the brāhmanas and Vaishnavas, but also by the demigods. Mystics and transcendentalists, by the mercy of the Lord, cross beyond nescience by ceasing all material desires. It is not possible, therefore, that the Supreme Lord can be favored by others. Purport: unless one is favored by the Supreme Lord, one cannot cross over the ocean of nescience of repeated birth and death. Here it is stated that yogis or mystics cross beyond nescience by the mercy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. There are many kinds of mystics, such as the karma yogi, jnana yogi, dhyan yogi, and bhakti yogi. The karmis particularly search after the favor of the demigods. The jnanis want to become one with the Supreme Absolute Truth, and the yogis are satisfied simply by partial vision of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Paramatma, and ultimately by oneness with Him. But the bhaktas, the devotees, want to associate with the Supreme Personality of Godhead eternally and serve Him. It has already been admitted that the Lord is eternal, and those who want the favor of the Supreme Lord perpetually are also eternal. Therefore, yogis here means devotees. But by the mercy of the Lord, devotees can easily pass beyond the nescience of birth and death and attain the eternal abode of the Lord. The Lord is therefore not in need of another's favor, because no one is equal to or greater than Him. Actually, everyone needs the favor of the Lord for successful understanding of this human mission. The goddess of fortune, Lakshmi, the dust of whose feet is worn on the head by others, waits upon you as appointed, for she is anxious to secure a place in the abode of the king of bees, who hovers on the fresh wreath of tulsi leaves offered at your feet by some blessed devotee. As previously described, tulsi has attained all superior qualities due to being placed at the lotus feet of the Lord. The comparison made here is very nice. As the king of bees hovers over the tulsi leaves offered to the lotus feet of the Lord, so Lakshmi, the goddess who is sought by the demigods, Brahmins, Vaishnavas, and everyone else, always engages in rendering service to the lotus feet of the Lord. The conclusion is that no one can be the benefactor of the Lord. Everyone is actually the servant of the Lord. O Lord, you are exceedingly attached to the activities of your pure devotees. Yet you are never attached to the goddesses of fortune who constantly engage in your transcendental living service. How can you be purified, therefore, by the dust of the path, by the dust of the path traversed by the brāhmanas? And how can you be glorified or made fortunate by the marks of Srivatsa on your chest? Purport: it is said in the Brahma Samhita that the Lord is always served by many hundreds of thousands of goddesses of fortune in his Vaikuṇṭha planet. Yet, because of his attitude of renunciation of all opulences, he is not attached to any one of them. The Lord has 6 opulences: unlimited wealth, unlimited fame, unlimited strength, unlimited beauty, unlimited knowledge, and unlimited renunciation. All the demigods and other living entities worship Lakshmi, the goddess of fortune, just to get her favor. Yet the Lord is never attached to her, because he can create an unlimited number of such goddesses for his transcendental service. The goddess of fortune, Lakshmi, is sometimes envious of the tulsi leaves which are placed at the lotus feet of the Lord, for they remain fixed there and do not move. Whereas Lakshmiji, although stationed by the chest of the Lord, sometimes has to please other devotees who pray for her favor. Lakshmiji sometimes has to go to satisfy her numerous devotees, but tulsi leaves never forsake their position, and the Lord therefore appreciates the service of the tulsi more than the service of Lakshmi. When the Lord says, therefore, that it is due to the causeless mercy of the brāhmanas that Lakshmiji does not leave him, we can understand that Lakshmiji is attracted by the opulence of the Lord, not by the brāhmaṇas' benedictions upon him. The Lord is not dependent on anyone's mercy for his opulence. He is always self-sufficient. The Lord's statement that his opulence is due to the benediction of the brāhmanas and Vaishnavas is only to teach others that they should offer respect to the brāhmanas and Vaishnavas and devotees of the Lord. O Lord, you are the personification of all religion. Therefore you manifest yourself in 3 millenniums, and thus you protect this universe, which consists of animate and inanimate beings. By your grace, which is of pure goodness and is the bestower of all blessings, kindly drive away the elements of Rajas and Tamas for the sake of the demigods and twice born. The Lord is addressed in this verse as Tri Yuga, or one who appears in 3 millenniums, namely the Satya, Dwapara, and Treta Yugas. He is not mentioned as appearing in the 4th millennium or Kali Yuga. It is described in Vedic literature that in Kali Yuga he comes as Chanavatar, or an incarnation. Itam Rishi David Jashavatar Lokan Vihavasi Hamsi Jagatpati Tam Dharmam Mahapurusha Pasayuganavritam Channa Kalo Yada Bhavastri Yuga Tasatam. Sorry. It is described in Vedic literature that in Kali Yuga he comes as Chanavatar, or an incarnation, but he does not appear as a manifest incarnation. In the other yugas, however, the Lord is a manifest incarnation, and therefore he is addressed as Tri Yuga, or the Lord who appears in 3 yugas. Sridhar Swami describes Tri Yuga as follows. Yuga means couple, and Tri means 3. The Lord is manifested as 3 couples by his 6 opulences, or 3 couples of opulences. In that way, he can be addressed as Sri Yuga. The Lord is the personality of religious principles. In 3 millenniums, religious principles are protected by 3 kinds of spiritual culture, namely austerity, cleanliness, and mercy. The Lord is called Tri Yuga in that way also. In the age of Kali, these 3 requisites to spiritual culture are almost absent. But the Lord is so kind that in spite of Kali Yugas being devoid of these 3 spiritual qualities, he comes and protects the people of this age in his covered incarnation as Lord Chaitanya. Lord Chaitanya is called, quote-unquote, covered, because although he is Krishna himself, he presents himself as a devotee of Krishna, not directly Krishna. The devotees pray to Lord Chaitanya, therefore to eliminate their stock of passion and ignorance, the most conspicuous asset of this yuga. The devotees pray to Lord Chaitanya, therefore, to eliminate their stock of passion and ignorance, the most conspicuous assets in this yuga. It just reminds me, there was a time when people were really harassing us on Sankirtan, especially at the airports, because Hare Krishna was becoming more and more known. And we had just ordered a bunch of Krishna books to distribute. So some devotees didn't want to distribute them because they thought, how are we going to distribute books that say Krishna right on them? But I think it was Divyanga who broke the logjam, because on Janmashtami one day at St. Louis Airport, he said, I don't care what anybody says, I'm selling Krishna books. And they went out like hotcakes. And from then on, there was a mad rush to get Krishna books. In any case, I was in LAX one day in Los Angeles, and I was distributing a book, and this guy bought it, and he came back, and he goes, wait a minute, is this Hare Krishna? And you know, on the cover of the Krishna book, it says Krishna. I said, no, this one's just plain Krishna. And he said, oh, all right then. And he that's why he was covered. Lord Chaitanya is called covered because although he is Krishna himself, he presents himself as a devotee of Krishna, not directly Krishna. The devotees pray to Lord Chaitanya, therefore, to eliminate their stock of passion and ignorance, the most conspicuous assets of this yuga. In the Hare Krishna, in the Krishna consciousness movement, one cleanses himself of the modes of passion and ignorance by chanting the holy name of the Lord, Hare Krishna, as introduced by Lord Chaitanya. The four Kumaras were cognizant of their situation in the modes of passion and ignorance, because although in Vaikuṇṭha they wanted to curse devotees of the Lord, the four Kumaras were cognizant of their situation in the modes of passion and ignorance, because although in Vaikuṇṭha they wanted to curse devotees of the Lord. Since they were conscious of their own weakness, they prayed to the Lord to remove their still existing passion and ignorance. The three transcendental qualifications, cleanliness, austerity, and mercy, are the qualifications of the twice-born and the demigods. Those who are not situated in the quality of goodness cannot accept these three principles of spiritual culture. For the Krishna consciousness movement, therefore, there are three sinful activities which are prohibited, namely illicit sex, intoxication, eating food other than prasad offered to the Lord. These three prohibitions are based on the principles of austerity, cleanliness, and mercy. Devotees are merciful because they spare the poor animals, and they are clean because they are free of contamination from unwanted foodstuff and unwanted habits. Austerity is represented by restricted sex life. These principles, indicated by the prayers of the four Kumaras, should be followed by the devotees who are engaged in Krishna consciousness. O Lord, you are the protector of the highest of the twice-born. If you do not protect them by offering worship and mild words, then certainly the auspicious path of worship will be rejected by people in general who act on the strength and authority of your lordship. Purport: in Bhagavad Gita, it is stated by the Lord himself that the acts and character of great authorities are followed by people in general. Leaders of ideal character are therefore needed in society. Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, appeared in this material world just to show the example of perfect authority, and people have to follow his path. The Vedic injunction is that one cannot understand the absolute truth simply by mental speculation or logical argument. One has to follow the authorities. Mahajano yena katasa panta. Great authorities should be followed. Otherwise, if we simply depend on the scriptures, we are sometimes misled by rascals, or else we cannot understand or follow the different spiritual injunctions. The best path is to follow the authorities. The four Brahmin sages stated that Krishna is naturally the protector of the cows and the Brahmanas. Go Brahmana hitaya cha. When Krishna was on this planet, he set a practical example. He was a cowherd boy, and he was very respectful to the Brahmins and devotees. It is also affirmed herein that the Brahmanas are the best of the twice-born. Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, and Vaishyas are all twice-born, but the Brahmanas are the best. When there is a fight between two persons, each of them protects the upper part of his body, the head, the arms, and the belly. Similarly, for the actual advancement of human civilization, the best part of the social body, namely the Brahmanas and Kshatriyas and Vaishyas, the intelligent class of men, the military class, and the mercantile men, should be given special protection. Protection of the laborers should not be neglected, but special protection should be given to the upper orders. Of all classes of men, the Brahmanas and the Vaiṣṇavas should be given special protection. They should be worshipped. When their protection is performed, it is just like worshiping God. That is not exactly protection. It is a duty. One should worship the Brahmanas and Vaishnavas by offering them all kinds of endowments and sweet words. And if one has no means to offer anything, he must at least use sweet words to pacify them. The Lord personally exhibited this behavior toward the Kumaras. If this system is not introduced by the leaders, then human civilization will be lost. When there is no protection and special treatment for persons who are devotees of the Lord, who are highly intelligent in spiritual life, then the whole society is lost. The word nakshyati indicates that such a civilization becomes spoiled and is annihilated. The kind of civilization recommended is called Devapat, which means the royal road of the demigods. Demigods are supposed to be fully fixed in devotional service or Krishna consciousness. That is the auspicious path that should be protected. If the authorities or the leaders of society do not give special respect to the brāhmaṇas and Vaishnavas and do not offer them not only sweet words but also facilities, then the path of progress will be lost to human civilization. The Lord personally wanted to teach this, and therefore he offered so much praise to the Kumaras. Gauranga stretch. Where are we? Dear Lord, you never want the auspicious path to be destroyed, for you are the reservoir of all goodness. Just to benefit people in general, you destroy the evil element by your mighty potency. You are the proprietor of the three creations and the maintainer of the entire universe. Therefore, your potency is not reduced by your submissive behavior. Rather, by submission, you exhibit your transcendental pastimes. Lord Krishna was never reduced in his position by becoming a cowherd boy or by offering respect to Sudama Brahmana or his other devotees like Nanda Maharaj, Vasudeva, Maharaj Yudhishthira, and the Pandavas' mother Kunti. Everyone knew that he was the Supreme Personality of Godhead Krishna, yet his behavior was exemplary. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is Sakchidananda Vigraha. His form is completely spiritual, full of bliss and knowledge, and it is eternal. Because the living entities are his parts and parcels, originally they also belong to the same quality of eternal form as the Lord. But when they come in contact with Maya, the material potency, due to their forgetfulness, their existential constitution is covered. We should try to understand the appearance of Lord Krishna in this spirit, as the Kumaras pray to him. He is eternally a cowherd boy at Vrindavan. He is eternally the leader of the battle of Kurukshetra, and he is eternally the opulent prince of Dwarka and the lover of the damsels of Vrindavan. All his appearances are meaningful because they show his real characteristics to the conditioned souls who have forgotten their relationship with the Supreme Lord. He does everything for their benefit. The force exhibited in the battle of Kurukshetra by the desire of Krishna, and through the agency of Arjuna was also necessary because when people become too irreligious, force is required. Non-violence in this respect is rascaldom. 25. O Lord, whatever punishment you wish to award to these two innocent persons, or also to us, we shall accept without duplicity. We understand that we have cursed two faultless persons. The sages, the four Kumaras, now reject their cursing of the two doorkeepers, Jaya and Vijaya, because they are now conscious that persons who engage in the service of the Lord cannot be at fault at any stage. It is said that anyone who has implicit faith in the service of the Lord, or who actually engages in transcendental loving service, has all the good qualities of the demigods. Therefore, a devotee cannot be at fault. If sometimes it is found that he is in error by accident or by some temporary arrangement, that should not be taken very seriously. The cursing of Jaya and Vijaya is here repented. Now the Kumars are thinking in terms of their position in the modes of passion and ignorance, and they are prepared to accept any kind of punishment from the Lord. In general, when dealing with devotees, we should not try to find faults. In Bhagavad Gita also, it is confirmed that the devotee who faithfully serves the Supreme Lord, even if found to commit a gross mistake, should be considered a sadhu, or saintly person. Due to former habits, he may commit some wrong, but because he is engaged in the service of the Lord, that wrong should not be taken very seriously. The Lord replied, O Brahmanas, know that the punishment you inflicted on them was originally ordained by me, and therefore they will fall to a birth in a demoniac family. But they will be firmly united with me in thought through mental concentration, intensified by anger, and they will return to my presence shortly. And Vijaya. Purport: the Lord stated that the punishment inflicted by the sages upon the doorkeepers, Jaya and Vijaya, was conceived by the Lord himself. Without the Lord's sanction, nothing can happen. It is to be understood that there was a plan in the cursing of the Lord's devotees in Vaikuṇṭha, and his plan is explained by many stalwart authorities. The Lord sometimes desires to fight. The fighting spirit also exists in the Supreme Lord. Otherwise, how could fighting be manifested at all? Because the Lord is the source of everything, anger and fighting are also inherent in his personality. When he desires to fight with someone, he has to find an enemy. But in the Vaikuṇṭha world, there is no enemy, because everyone is engaged fully in his service. Therefore, he sometimes comes to the material world as an incarnation in order to manifest his fighting spirit. The Bhagavad Gita 4.8 also says, in the Bhagavad Gita 4.8, it is also said that the Lord appears just to give protection to the devotees and to annihilate the non-devotees. The non-devotees are found in the material world, not in the spiritual world. Therefore, when the Lord wants to fight, he has to come to this world. But who will fight with the Supreme Lord? No one is able to fight with him. Therefore, because the Lord's pastimes in the material world are always performed with his associates, not with others, he has to find some devotee who will play the part of an enemy. In Bhagavad Gita, the Lord says to Arjuna, my dear Arjuna, both you and I have appeared many, many times in this material world, but you have forgotten, whereas I remember. Thus Jaya and Vijaya were selected by the Lord to fight with him in the material world, and that was the reason the sages came to see him, and accidentally the doorkeepers were cursed. It was the Lord's desire to send them to the material world, not personally, but for some time, not perpetually, but for some time. Therefore, just as on a theatrical stage, someone takes the part of enemy to the proprietor of the stage, although the play is for a short time, and there is no permanent enmity between the servant and the proprietor. So the Sura Janas, devotees, were cursed by the sages to go to the Asura Jana, or atheistic families. That a devotee should come into an atheistic family is surprising, but it is simply a show. After finishing their mock fighting, both the devotee and the Lord are again associated in the spiritual planets. That is very explicitly explained here. The conclusion is that no one falls from the spiritual world or Vaikuṇṭha planet, for it is the eternal abode. But sometimes, as the Lord desires, devotees come into this material world as preachers or as atheists. In each case, we must understand that there is a plan of the Lord. Lord Buddha, for example, was an incarnation, yet he preached atheism. There is no God. But actually, there was a plan behind this, as explained in the Bhagavatam. Text 27. Lord Brahma said, after seeing the Lord of Vaikuṇṭha, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, in the self-illuminated Vaikuṇṭha planet, the sages left that transcendental abode. Purport. The transcendental abode of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, as stated in Bhagavad Gita and confirmed in this verse, is self-illuminated. In Bhagavad Gita it is said that the spiritual world, in the spiritual world, there is no need of sun, moon, or electricity. This indicates that all the planets there are self-illuminated, self-sufficient, and independent. Everything there is complete. Lord Krishna says that once one goes to that Vaikuṇṭha planet, he never returns. That the inhabitants of Vaikuṇṭha never return to the material world. But the incident of Jaya and Vijaya was a different case. They came to the material world for some time, and then they returned to Vaikuṇṭha. The sages circumambulated the Supreme Lord, offered their obeisances, and returned, extremely delighted at learning of the divine opulences of the Vaiṣṇava. It is still a respectful practice to circumambulate the Lord in Hindu temples. Especially in Vaiṣṇava temples, there is an arrangement for people to offer respects to the deity and circumambulate the temple at least 3 times. The Lord then said to his attendants, Jaya and Vijaya, depart this place, but fear not. All glories unto you. Though I am capable of nullifying the Brahman's curse, I will not do so. On the contrary, it has my approval. Huh?
It's causing a little disturbance.
Okay. As explained in connection with text 26, all the incidents that took place had the approval of the Lord. Ordinarily, there's no possibility that the 4 sages could be so angry with the doorkeepers. Nor could the Supreme Lord neglect his 2 doorkeepers, nor can one come back from Vaikuṇṭha after one's taking birth there. All these incidents, therefore, were designed by the Lord himself for the sake of his pastimes in the material world. Thus, he plainly says that it was done with his approval. Otherwise, it would have been impossible for inhabitants of Vaikuṇṭha to come back to this material world simply because of a Brahminical curse. The Lord especially blesses the so-called culprits. All glories unto you. A devotee once accepted by the Lord can never fall down. That is the conclusion of this incident. This departure from Vaikuṇṭha was foretold by Lakshmi, the goddess of fortune. She was very angry because when she left my abode and then returned, you stopped her. She was very angry because when she left my abode and then returned, you stopped her at the gate while I was sleeping. Never take the service as a gatekeeper. The Lord assured the 2 Vaikuṇṭha inhabitants, Jaya and Vijaya, by practicing the mystic yoga system in anger, you will be cleansed of the sin of disobeying the brāhmanas, and within a very short time return to me. The Supreme Personality of God had advised the 2 doorkeepers, Jaya and Vijaya, that by dint of bhakti yoga, in anger, they would be delivered from the curse of the brāhmanas. Srila Madhva Muni remarks in this connection that by practicing bhakti yoga, one can become free from all sinful reactions. Even a Brahma shapa, or curse by a brāhmana, which cannot be overcome by any other means, can be overcome by bhakti yoga. One can practice bhakti yoga in many rasas. There are 12 rasas, 5 primary and 7 secondary. The 5 primary rasas constitute direct bhakti, but although the 7 secondary rasas are indirect, they are also counted within bhakti yoga if they are used in the service of the Lord. In other words, Bhakti Yoga is all-inclusive. If one somehow or other becomes attached to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he becomes engaged in Bhakti Yoga, as described in Srimad Bhagavatam 10:29-15. Kamam Krodam Bhayam. The gopis were attracted to Krishna by Bhakti Yoga in a relationship of lusty desire, kama. Similarly, Kamsa was attached to Bhakti Yoga by dint of fear of his death. Thus, Bhakti Yoga is so powerful that even becoming an enemy of the Lord and always thinking of Him can deliver one very quickly. It is said, Vishnu Bhakti Smrito Daiva Asuras Tadviparyaya. Devotees of Lord Vishnu are called demigods, whereas non-devotees are called asuras. But Bhakti Yoga is so powerful that both demigods and asuras can derive its benefits if they always think of the personality of Godhead. The basic principle of Bhakti Yoga is to think of the Supreme Lord always. The Lord says in Bhagavad Gita 18:65, Manmana bhavamad bhakta, always think of me. It doesn't matter which way one thinks. The very thought of the personality of God is the basic principle of Bhakti Yoga. In the material planets, there are different grades of sinful activities, of which disrespecting a brāhmaṇa or a Vaiṣṇava is the most sinful. Here it is clearly stated that one can overcome even that grave sin simply by thinking of Vishnu, not even favorably, but in anger. Thus, even if those who are not devotees always think of Vishnu, they become free from all sinful activities. Krishna consciousness is the highest form of thought. Krishna consciousness is the highest form of thought. Lord Vishnu is thought of in this age by chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. From the statements of the Bhagavatam, it appears that if one thinks of Krishna even as an enemy, that particular qualification, thinking of Vishnu or Krishna, cleanses one of all sins. After thus speaking at the door of Vaikuṇṭha, the Lord returned to his abode, where there are many celestial airplanes and all-surpassing wealth and splendor. It is clear from this verse that all the incidents took place at the entrance of Vaikuṇṭha Loka. In other words, the sages were not actually within Vaikuṇṭha Loka, but were at the gate. It could be asked, how could they return to the material world if they entered Vaikuṇṭha Loka? But factually they did not enter, and therefore they returned. There are many similar statements where great yogis and brāhmanas, by dint of their yoga practice, have gone from this material world to Vaikuṇṭha Loka, but they were not meant to stay there. They came back. It is also confirmed here that the Lord was surrounded by many Vaikuṇṭha airplanes. Vaikuṇṭha Loka is described here as having splendid opulence, far surpassing the splendor of this material world. All other living creatures, including the demigods, are born of Brahma, and Brahma is born of Lord Vishnu. Krishna states in Bhagavad Gita in the 10th chapter, Aham Sarvasya Prabhava. Lord Vishnu is the origin of all manifestations in the material world. Those who know that Lord Vishnu is the origin of everything, who are conversant with the process of creation, and who understand that Vishnu or Krishna is the most worshipable object of all living entities, engage themselves in Vishnu worship as Vaishnavas. The Vedic hymns also confirm this. Om Tad Vishnu Paravam Param. The goal of this life is to understand Vishnu. The Bhagavatam also confirms this elsewhere. Foolish people, not knowing that Vishnu is the supreme worshipable object, create so many worshipable objects in this material world, and therefore they fall down. But those two gatekeepers, the best of the demigods, their beauty and luster diminished by the curse of the Brahmins, became morose and fell from Vaikuṇṭha, the abode of the Supreme Lord. Then as Jaya and Vijaya fell from the Lord's abode, a great roar of disappointment arose from all the demigods who were sitting in their splendid airplanes. Lord Brahma continued, those two principal doorkeepers of the personality of Godhead have now entered the womb of Diti, the powerful semen of Kashyapa, having covered them. Here's proof of how a living entity coming originally from Vaikuṇṭha Loka is encaged in material elements. The living entity takes shelter within the semen of a father, which is injected within the womb of a mother. And with the help of the mother's emulsified ovum, the living entity grows a particular type of body. In this connection, it is to be remembered that the mind of Kashyapa Muni was not in order when he conceived the two sons, Hiranyaksha and Hiranyakashipu. Therefore, the semen he discharged was simultaneously extremely powerful and mixed with the quality of anger. It is to be concluded that while conceiving a child, one's mind must be very sober and devotional. For this purpose, the Garbhadana Samskara is recommended in the Vedic scriptures. If the mind of the father is not sober, the semen discharged will not be very good. Thus the living entity, wrapped in the matter produced from the father and mother, will be demoniac, like Hiranyaksha and Hiranyakashipu. The conditions of conception are to be carefully studied. This is a very great science. It is the prowess of these twin asuras, demons, that has disturbed you, for it has minimized your power. There is no remedy within my power, however, for it is the Lord himself who desires to do this. Although Hiranyakashipu and Hiranyaka, formerly Jaya and Vijaya, became asuras, the demigods of this material world could not control them, and therefore Lord Brahma said that neither he nor all the demigods could counteract the disturbance they created. They came within the material world by the order of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and he alone could counteract such disturbances. In other words, although Jaya and Vijaya assumed the bodies of asuras, they remained more powerful than anyone, thus proving that the Supreme Personality of Godhead desired to fight because the fighting spirit is also within him. He is the origin of everything, but when he desires to fight, he must fight with a devotee. Therefore, by his desire only were Jaya and Vijaya cursed by the Kumaras. The Lord ordered the gatekeepers to go down to the material world to become his enemies so that he could fight with them, and his fighting desires would be satisfied by the service of his personal devotees. Brahma showed the demigods that the situation created by the darkness for which they were disturbed was the desire of the Supreme Lord. He wanted to show that even though these two attendants were coming in the form of demons, they were very powerful, greater than the demigods, who could not control them. No one can surpass the acts of the Supreme Lord. The demigods were also advised not to try to counteract this incident because it was ordered by the Lord. Similarly, anyone who is ordered by the Lord to perform some action in this world, especially preaching his glories, cannot be counteracted by anyone. The will of the Lord is executed under all circumstances. We're going to have to leave it there. No, we're a little late. All right. My dear sons, the Lord is the controller of the three modes of nature and is responsible for the creation, preservation, and dissolution of the universe. His wonderful creative power, Yogamaya, cannot be easily understood even by the masters of yoga. That most ancient person, the Personality of Godhead, will alone come to our rescue. What purpose can we serve on his behalf by deliberating on the subject? Purport: when something is arranged by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one should not be disturbed by it, even if it appears to be a reverse according to one's calculations. For example, sometimes we see that a powerful preacher is killed, or sometimes he is put into difficulty, just as Haridas Thakur was. He was a great devotee who came into this material world to execute the will of the Lord by preaching the Lord's glories. But Haridas was punished at the hands of the Qazi by being beaten in 22 marketplaces. Similarly, Lord Jesus Christ was crucified and Prahlad Maharaj was put through so many tribulations. The Pandavas were also direct friends of Krishna, who were direct friends of Krishna, lost their kingdom. Their wife was insulted, and they had to undergo many severe tribulations. Seeing all these reverses affect devotees, one should not be disturbed. One should simply understand that in these matters there must be some plan of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The Bhagavatam's conclusion is that a devotee is never disturbed by such reverses. He accepts even reverse conditions as the grace of the Lord. One who continues to serve the Lord even in reverse conditions is assured that he will go back home, back to Godhead, back to the Vaikuṇṭha planets. Lord Brahma assured the demigods that there was no use in talking about how the disturbing situation of darkness was taking place, since the actual fact was that it was ordered by the Supreme Lord. Brahma knew this because he was a great devotee. It was possible for him to understand the plan of the Lord. Thus end the Bhaktivedanta purports of the 3rd canto, 16th chapter of the Srimad Bhagavatam, entitled Two Doorkeepers of Vaikuṇṭha, Jaya and Vijaya, cursed by sages. Bravo! Bravissimo! Sadhu, sadhu! Jai, Jai! Jai, Vijay! Okay, we're going to need a volume in here. Owarimashita. Ho gaya. Terminado. Finished. So,
Just 6 days.
That's what it was, 6 days?
No, 8 days.
We've been 8 days?
8 days.
No way, no way. 8 days feels like 8 minutes. 8 pages a day? Okay, so can I have the other volume? What do you mean? Do you have the big volume or the little teeny one? Where is it? Okay, we'll get it later. Thank you. How'd you get it? You're sneaky. Dear Srila Prabhupada, dear Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Shri Shri Pancha Tattva, Shri Shri Radha Madan Mohan, Shri Shri Lakshmi Shringadev, if you so desire. Please give us the forbearance to take everything that happens to us as the Lord's arrangement for us in His service. Thank you for considering our request. Om Tat Sat. Everyone agrees with this prayer. Think carefully. In part or in whole, please unmute and say Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna! Done deal. Gaur Premanande, Nitai Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaura Hari Bol, Nitai Gaura Hari Bol. It's a cappella. A cappella. Hari Bol, Nitai Gaura Hari Bol. What a choir. Vanchagopdurusha Kripasundameva Chapatitanam Pavadibhyo Vishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Ananta Koti Vaishnavini Ki Jai.